Of that. What happens if that memo is made public?
First, let's recognize what's happening in the special counsel's investigation. The investigative vice is tightening around Donald Trump. Mark Corello, who was on Air Force One and helped Donald Trump write an exceedingly deceptive memo about the Trump Tower meeting, is going to be interviewed. Two people have been convicted, close associates of Donald Trump, and two other associates are going to be tried sometime this year. So the reaction of the White House is one of desperation, and they're trying to use this memo. It's been very explicit against both Mueller and Rod Rosenstein. I think that there's a backlash building in the United States Senate. We've seen it in a number of my colleagues who've been explicit on this topic. John Thune, who has urged caution, others who have talked privately about it. And it's such a violation of the norms of the intelligence community and the intelligence committees for this kind of gutter partisan politics to drag down the FBI and the CIA methods and sources. The political weaponization of intelligence is contrary to the basic concepts of how the Senate deals with this topic.
Do you think, Senator, Democrats, although they may not think it's the right thing to do, but just to counter what the Nunes memo says, should put out their own version of the intelligence that they've seen?
There has to be the Democratic summary of the intelligence, and I think there also at some point will be consideration of putting out the warrant application. Remember, this summary that Nunes is putting out is a mischaracterization. It's a very selective, cherry-picked summary of a warrant application, which probably runs 50 to 60 pages, contains a number of the reasons that the warrant was granted by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court judge. And some of that may come out as well, simply to provide real transparency rather than this distortion.
Okay, so President Trump has just tweeted, I confess I haven't seen it yet. Let's see what he says. The top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. Rank and file are great people. Joe, this is a distinction the White House has tried to make from the outset. Every time Donald Trump says something outrageous, they say, we're not talking about the rank and file guys. They're great. They're doing the hard work. They're stopping terrorist attacks. It's the leadership of the FBI that's corrupt, the argument goes.
Well, and all you have to do is go back and see what Donald Trump said about James Comey after James Comey basically handed him the presidency. It is so important for everybody to remember Donald Trump is attacking the leadership of the FBI. This is the FBI that investigated against Hillary Clinton for a year and a half. This is the FBI that at times leaked, and the Clinton people would tell you leaked all the time throughout the campaign. So there were constantly stories on the front pages of the newspaper about the state of the investigation. This is the FBI that released a letter 10 days beforehand at the urging of Peter Strzok, who helped draft the memo. That was released 10 days before, and there's not a historian that writes a book on the 2016 election, Willie, that won't say that that put wind back in Donald Trump's sails. His campaign was down in some polls by 10, 11, 12 points around that time, and he came back and he won. And that was the FBI. And he praised the FBI when things went his way, condemned them when they didn't. All of these people, too, Republicans. Rod Rosenstein, Republican. Bob Mueller, Republican. James Comey was a lifetime Republican. Andrew McCabe, you don't have to register Republican or Democrat in Virginia, but he voted in the Republican primary. They're all Republicans.
Chris Wray.
The Supreme Court, controlled by Republicans. Chris Wray, the FBI director, a Republican. It is Republicans who are saying
it's also
that this
the FBI
memo is
Willie,
reckless.
It's also the FBI that never disclosed that Donald Trump and his campaign was under investigation during the campaign. There were all these disclosures, as Joe has rightly said, about the Clinton campaign, which probably very seriously damaged her chances of winning. But the fact that collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians in their meddling was under investigation never was disclosed. I think a lot of the statements that Donald Trump has made in connection with the release of the Nunes memo may well come back to haunt him as evidence of obstruction, because what we're seeing is obstruction of justice unfolding in real time right before us.
So, Senator, given that landscape and given your comments just now about obstruction, could you legitimately include, I mean, you're from a prosecutor, Attorney General of the state of Connecticut. If you take Devin Nunes' statements about the memo and about the ongoing investigation, and you look at the weirdly constructed statement that is about to be released, apparently, what about Devin Nunes obstructing justice?
I think there is probably a credible case involving Nunes as well, not just in what we know publicly, but in conversations that no doubt took place between him and the White House, which evidently was involved in drafting that 3.5-page memo. What we don't know is all of those private communications, and as you well know, Nunes himself was under investigation by the House Ethics Committee for the unprecedented and hugely embarrassing visits he had with the White House just a year or so ago. So there is a lot there that I think could come back to haunt him too.
Senator, we were wondering earlier why it was that Devin Nunes has not yet shown the memo that he has crafted to your colleagues, your Republican colleagues in the Senate, and whether the more deliberative body still might find, the Republicans in that deliberative body might find this not acceptable for release. Are you hearing anything from your Republican colleagues about their reaction to the memo and what they would say were they shown it?
That's a great question, and I am hearing from a number of my Republican colleagues who are deeply troubled. They are hugely concerned about this breach in protocol and norms. You know, when we hear intelligence, we go into a room that is proofed and debugged. We leave our electronic devices at the door. We also leave our politics at the door because it involves national security. Premature or unauthorized disclosure literally can kill people, informants or agents who are operating undercover. We take this task very seriously. I am not on the Intelligence Committee, and my colleagues on the Intelligence Committee will not talk to me about some of what they hear in the Senate Intelligence Committee. So a number of my colleagues are very troubled. I think there will be a backlash against this breach of protocol and norms that are so vital to the country. And by the way, transparency has a role, and there should be transparency.
Might those Senate Republicans speak up if this memo is released? Could we hear from them?
I think they should. Let me put it that way. I've been disappointed that we've seen less outspoken Republican qualms about this memo. We've seen very few Republicans break their silence on it, and we've seen a lot less support than I would like for the special counsel legislation that I've introduced. A number of my colleagues are considering it, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what's really important here is to protect the special